Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for joining us for our May 2023 Rural Roundtable. We do still have a couple of folks entering the room, so we're going to give them a couple of minutes to get in before we get started today. Today's roundtable will be focusing on narcotics-related offenses and challenges that you all may be experiencing. We have a couple of guest speakers with us today. Just as a reminder, the flow of today's event will be about 30 minutes of presentation from our guest speaker, as well as 2 grantees currently in the program. And then we'll open it up for facilitated discussion for the last 30 minutes. So those 30 minutes where we're facilitated discussion, feel free to put any questions or thoughts or comments that you have, either in the Q&A feature at the bottom of the screen that you see there, or when we are in the facilitated discussion session, you can come off of mute. We do just ask that you use that raise hand feature to come off of mute so that we can call on folks so that folks are not speaking over one another. Couple of other housekeeping events or items before we start today's event. One, we are being recorded, so we will share the recording for folks in the future for those of you who want to rewatch today's event or those who weren't able to attend to have future access. We'll send out an email once that recording is available for you all. Right now, we have muted everyone just to prevent background noise while folks are speaking. But again, if you'd like to come off of mute later during this discussion, just raise your hand. There will be a brief evaluation survey at the end of today's event. It should only take a few moments to complete. We do appreciate you all completing those. It helps us improve for our future events. So we'll provide that link later in today's presentation, as well as in our follow-up email. And then we've talked about the facilitated discussion piece and question and answer agenda, so I won't repeat those. But our agenda for today is our guest speaker is Chief James MacGillis of the Wauwatosa, Wisconsin Police Department. So he's going to speak about his experience working and addressing these types of challenges, as well as working with HIDTA. And then our 2 grantee presentations are from Hancock County, Tennessee Sheriff's Office and the Ashland, Alabama Police Department. And then, as we mentioned, we'll open it up for that facilitated discussion. At the end, we will close out with future events that we are planning. Okay. So at this point, I will turn it over to our guest speaker, Chief James MacGillis, to talk about his experience. So, Chief, I will let you take it away.
Thank you, Sam. Good afternoon, everybody. I've been with the City of Wauwatosa Police Department for about 2 years. Prior to that, I worked for the City of Milwaukee Police Department, where I retired as a captain about 2 years ago. I worked in training, operations. I also worked on the HIDTA enforcement side as a task force group supervisor, and also worked standard investigations over there. I wanted to provide some context, some information now that my role has changed from a big city department to a more rural department. The City of Wauwatosa is about 48,000 residents. That doubles in population every day to almost 100,000 people. However, we are considered like a gateway community to lake country areas around the large municipality of Milwaukee or Milwaukee Metro, the county itself. So I take the perspective that our role is important as a department to help agencies that are significantly smaller in size, capacity, or population. But from my previous agency, it's also given me that perspective. It's not always about the biggest city. You have to scale services and how you provide policing also to smaller municipalities as well, because they're the same problems, just different scale and different levels of frequency. So the department I work for now is about 104 people. We do have members that work in HIDTA on the U.S. Marshals Task Force. We also have one that's assigned to the drug gang task force in HIDTA in the Milwaukee County area. We also have several of our members that work for violent crimes task force with the FBI, and one that does work with the Secret Service white collar crimes task force. These are all force multipliers. So for your agency size, depending on how big you are, if you can get somebody in that role, there's a lot of dividends, a lot of return on your investment. In fact, that is a measurable item, your return on investment, for your dedication of personnel in those particular task forces to fight narcotics that are affecting smaller communities or smaller municipalities. So I also have a unique perspective in between retiring from Milwaukee and coming to Wauwatosa. I worked as a drug intelligence officer for the state of Wisconsin, working with public health partners to work on overdose response strategy, the national overdose response strategy through the Office of ONDCP, the Office of National Drug, I forget what it stands for. I'm trying to go faster because I want to leave time for questions at the end. But ONDCP is a mothership out of the White House that funds these type of programs, the HIDTA programs. And working as a drug intelligence officer, it was very valuable to see how capacity can be built, not just in larger municipalities, but also in very rural parts of the state of Wisconsin. So you're aware there are HIDTAs pretty much covering every part of the country. And if you know who to ask or how to ask, it can really help capacity building in a smaller agency or a rural police agency. And the best part about it, you do not need to have one of your officers, deputies, detectives embedded in HIDTA to tap into those resources. If you don't know, all HIDTAs have what's called a watch center or deconfliction center that can be used for deconflicting both people and events, so you don't have blue on blue violence. But the other benefit to it is if you have a smaller level seizure in a rural area, you can wash a name, a phone number, a license plate through a watch center, and you can find out if there are other cases involving that particular person. They check databases such as RISC, Case Explorer, Natus, all these different databases. They don't tell you what the investigation's about, but they'll put you in touch with the relevant investigator so you can deconflict, but also figure out if you can partner up and collaborate. It's especially relevant when we talk about overdose investigations. Overdose investigations, you treat them as a homicide scene, but I would encourage you to wash those types of information points through a HIDTA watch center in your respective region of the country. It also helps you develop intelligence for solvability now, but also down the road. And I can go into that during the Q&A portion of it. When you run phone numbers through, you may not be able to solve it now, but it can, on the back end, if there's a bigger ticket investigation, can lead you right back to where your source of supply. Also, there's other resources through HIDTA that can be tapped into, Safe and Sound, which are the prevention initiatives, prevent the cycle of addiction, awareness, especially if you don't have the type of capacity in your agency. They have training programs that they can provide you that your community service officer or your school resource officer can utilize. You don't have to invent the wheel. They've already have those programs established for you to utilize. And the other piece I'm going to wrap up on is emerging drug trends. How do you know what you don't know? What type of drugs are going to be found in your jurisdiction or are suspected to then be coming into your jurisdiction? It's based a lot off of hub cities, points of distribution. Like Milwaukee, for example, our hub city is Chicago. You go to rural Wisconsin, it's the Twin Cities, Minneapolis, St. Paul area. So it would be better to have our northern jurisdictions in Wisconsin working closer with the Minneapolis, St. Paul HIDTA Watch Center versus the Milwaukee Watch Center when we have weird drugs coming in like fentanyl, xylazine, any of those other bizarre drugs, and that changes frequently. So I think, Sam, I'm right at my 10-minute mark, and I want to be respectful of the other presenters' time. So I'm going to wrap up with that and turn it back to you.
Perfect. Thanks so much, Chief. As you can hear, the Chief has talked about a variety of resources that are available. So again, for those of you who may have questions or things that are starting to percolate through your mind, feel free to put them in the chat feature. We will address them during our facilitated discussion portion, as well as if you have any questions come up while our RVCRI grantees are presenting. So with that, I am going to turn it over to our first RVCRI grantee presenter, which is Deputy Eric Scott with the Hancock County, Tennessee Sheriff's Office. So on the screen here, you will see that we are going to have him answer a couple of questions or prompts here. He's going to talk a little bit about Hancock County, what prompted them to apply for this grant program, what they're doing under it, and the work they've accomplished so far, as well as any kind of challenges or successes they've realized to date. And then briefly talk about the future and how they plan to sustain those efforts and the initiatives put under the RVCRI grant. So Deputy Scott, I will turn it over to you.
Good afternoon, everybody. I'm with the Hancock County Sheriff's Department here in Tennessee. Our agency is a rural mountainous agency, or we're in a rural mountainous area. We have approximately 22 officers that work for our sheriff's department. We police approximately 232 square miles. We have a lot of the same problems that everybody else has. Again, I think Chief MacGillis made the point very effectively in the aspect of it's just a matter of scale. The issues that we have here is primarily drug related, and that's what prompted us to apply for the RVCRI grant. Here in Hancock County, our technology is probably back in the 1990s. We're probably about six to 8 years of coming off to handwriting reports. And we went to a report writing system that it's on a computer, but our officers in the field do not have computers in their vehicles. So if they're 40 miles outside of town, they're coming all the way back to the district station to write a report. And so when this grant came up, it allowed us the opportunity to look at options that we had for improving our technology upgrades by acquiring computers, by acquiring a record management system, by acquiring Wi-Fi units, and then ultimately being a violent crime grant. Rural communities and small agencies tend to not qualify for a lot of grants. This grant was very specific and allowed us this entry point to address the issues, and our issue being drug related here, and everything that comes with drugs in your community. Your drug dealing equates to your drugs as a commodity, and that commodity want to be protected by weapons and violence. And then that also goes from not only on the streets, but also in the families. So we needed to try to figure out a way to target our, other than word of mouth and memory, target our violent crime areas, our hot spots, identify hot spots, identify times of year, identify times of the day, so we could focus our resources. Again, we only have 22 officers. So managing our resources and our personnel is important for us. And this grant gave us the opportunity to do that by acquiring the RMS system. That RMS system allows us to, as we record incidents, to be able to find out and go back on a historic basis as to when are we noticing the most violent crime is occurring? When are we noticing based upon arrest or officers' response to areas, what crimes are happening, the severity of crimes, the level of violence involved. And so that's what our goal orientation was to bring resources into our department to allow us to be effective with fighting violent crime in our community. One of the big things is that we don't have a significant tax base here in the county to provide us with a lot of equipment. And I know this sounds simple, but we aren't utilizing, or we're not utilizing radar units in our vehicles. And as a result of that, we're dependent upon on-site violations to actually stop vehicles. And what we know is that drugs go from one point or one location to another by vehicle. So if you're not actually seeing a violation happen, it's difficult to intercept and interdict the drugs that are coming into your community. So this grant allowed us the opportunity to get radar units for our vehicles, allowed us to be able to, with crimes that are observed as far as traffic violations go, to actually get a reasonable stop done and then interact with individuals that may be transporting drugs through our community. As far as some of the challenges goes for us, I would say that for us, initially, it was just getting started with the grant itself. At the time that we started, I was a new grants coordinator for our agency. We had never had one. And I had not been familiar with the program. grants.gov and sam.gov and the various aspects of it. So I'd say that as you guys are getting involved in this, as soon as you can establish a good relationship with your grants manager through this program, do so. Because they're going to really be the ones that's going to help you out with a lot of understanding what's involved. As we actually got involved, for instance, we knew that we had a problem and that we needed to improve our technology. We just didn't necessarily know how to do it. So when I actually started getting the equipment, the record management program, software, I did not know that we also needed a server to run the program on. So the reason I'm bringing this up is that on the front end, you may not have all the answers. Reach out to other agencies, get involved with other agencies, find out what they're doing. Try to find out as much information as you can from them so that when you're writing your grants and you're seeking the assistance of the grant program, that you can, to the best of your ability, hit the ground running. But that being said, this program allows you to actually get a lot of information. You don't have to be perfect with initiating the program in the way that you foresee it to be. There's a lot of assistance that's out there through the program and options that will be made available for you. As of this point, what we've done successfully is we've instituted our record management system. We've implemented our use of radar, and we've obtained Wi-Fi units for the computers to be able to communicate with the server system. So we're in the process of still going through, working through the bigger picture aspect of this, which ultimately is to be able to identify those violent crime hotspots, to be able to create data that we can analyze, that makes us more effective at fighting violent crime in our community. It's going to be a ongoing process for us. Again, I truly believe if I was to compare this to anything, my experience in law enforcement, I come from a law enforcement agency up in Maryland that has 660 personnel that works for them. It's a major metropolitan area. I came down here to this rural community and only to find out that they basically have nothing. So we're starting from or moving into the 1990s here with getting computers in the vehicle, with having Wi-Fi to be able to communicate with moving the reports from any vehicles to a server so that it can be reviewed by a supervisor at a different location. It's a work in progress for us, and it's going to be ongoing. But the grant itself has given us a lot of opportunities that we would not have had if it wasn't available. So, Ms. Reinerson, I give it back to you.
Thank you, Deputy. The one thing that I will add on or ask you to talk about briefly is you also repurposed some grant money, correct, to do an AED program. So on the backside, right, for when you're responding to some of those calls and maybe you need life-saving measures, right, given the rurality of your county and the disbursement of it. So can you talk about that just very briefly as well for that backside as well? Absolutely.
So what we wound up doing is we started this grant during the COVID period, where you had the supply chain issues. So in essence, at that time, with the inflated prices that were put out there, we wound up submitting our grant process based upon that. Well, what in essence happened is that over the course of our grant process in acquiring the different aspects of the plan that we set out, some of the pricing came down, and that allowed us to have some leftover funding. And that leftover funding allowed us to come back with our grants manager and to discuss what would also fall into the aspect of the rural violent crime program. And one of those things that falls into that is when you respond to violent crime, oftentimes that results in people having medical issues. And one of the things that we addressed was utilizing or obtaining AEDs for our vehicles. We can attain enough that we can't supply every vehicle with an AED, but we can provide AEDs on one per shift, so that when something's happening, if an officer responds and they need that medical resource, it's available to them. The byproduct of having an AED in the vehicle also becomes that our patrol units are always rolling. They're always in the field. And then you have a medical EMS personnel coming from a fixed position. If the call comes out, we may be there first, and quite frankly, oftentimes we are. So it was a bonus opportunity that came up to us as a result.
Thank you, Deputy. Perfect. All right, folks, we do have a second presenter from the Ashland, Alabama Police Department. He is running just a little bit late this afternoon as something has come up at the department, so we will give him a little bit of grace. With that, in the meantime, though, however,
I'm here, Samantha.
Oh, okay, there you are, Chief. All right. So folks, this is Chief Joseph Stanford from the Ashland, Alabama Police Department. So Chief, I'll turn it over to you, but just as we talked about, a brief overview about Ashland so that folks know, and then also talking through what you're doing under the why you applied for the funding and what you're doing under the program, any kind of successes or challenges you've realized to date. So I'll turn it over to you.
All right, sounds good. So yeah, I'm Chief Joseph Stanford with the Ashland Police Department. We're located in East Central Alabama. If most people are familiar with the Talladega racetrack, we're about 35 miles from the Talladega racetrack, located at the foothills of the Appalachian Mountains, and we have no U.S. highway or interstates that cross our borders. We're a 6 patrol officer department. I have an investigator that works for us. So we're a fairly small department servicing close to 2,000 citizens. Back when this grant became available, I noticed that our violent crime numbers had kind of went up. And part of that was the changeover to NIBRS, but it also included some new people moving into our area and a lot of violent crime happening in spurts. And so we started putting together all the statistics and looking at ways that we could change those numbers and create positive impact. And the way that we did that is we decided we would approach it with new technology. We designed our program after a city that's not too far from us, who has a lot more resources than we have. But what they do is they use computer-aided dispatch and video integration software and pole cameras and mobile camera trailers to try to identify hot spots and put more resources in those areas to help cut down on the violent crime. And so we use that model, and I think there's a couple of other cities around America that did the very same thing, is using that technology to address the violent crime increases. And so we're in the implementation process. We've purchased most of the equipment. Everything's already been purchased, but some of the problems that we've run into is getting the pole cameras installed. There's some issues with our state and the Department of Transportation, who says you can't do any whole lot of work on the right of way without their approval. And so I've had to kind of either work with the state or go around and get private companies or private organizations to give us access to put the cameras up. One success that we've been able to utilize is our mobile camera trailer. We've been able to use it, deploy it in areas where hot spots are identified. And in the last 2 months, we've actually been able to solve a couple of domestic violence crimes and be able to shore up the prosecution of those cases where an offender actually used a firearm. Nobody was hurt by the firearm, but he did use the firearm and tried to shoot at someone. So we've been able to use that mobile camera as a tool to help identify offenders and the actions that they're actually taking. And our sustainability to continue on that, to continue pushing forward. The city has actually sent some legislation down to our legislators in Montgomery. I don't even think I've told Samantha and them this, but to create a public safety fund. What it'll do is we're going to be able to get some monies set aside to help pay for technology increases and sustainability in our city. The real challenges, the things that we're struggling with are the getting permission to put those pole cameras up and drawing out the leases and dealing with lawyers and things of those nature.
Absolutely. Well, thank you, Chief. That is exciting news, right, about the legislation. So hopefully that works and goes through. And I think too, as well with the mobile trailer, right, you were able to deploy in a couple of areas. You mentioned a specific case, but we were talking a few months ago, you were able to deploy one of your hotspots, right, and also substantially reduce your overall calls for service in that particular area. Is that correct? Absolutely. Yeah, we were able to utilize that camera in an area where we were getting a lot of public intox and noise complaints. And once we dropped that camera off, and people saw the blue lights flashing on it and the LEDs on it, and the call volume went from 3 and 4 calls a shift to 0 calls per shift, especially on the night shift. So that's it pretty much speaks for itself. Absolutely. All right. Well, thank you so much, Chief, for speaking, as well, Deputy Scott. So now we are going to move into our open facilitated discussion Q&A portion. So again, reminder, feel free to put it in that chat feature that you see there at the bottom of your screen. For those of you who like to come off of mute and ask questions, feel free to just raise your hand or let us know so we can call on folks so that folks aren't speaking over one another. And I see that Chief MacGillis did put in what ONDCP stands for there in the chat, because we love our acronyms, right? But sometimes they're hard to keep track of. So thank you for that. One of the things that I have heard from these presentations, right, is, if you have the resources or if you're able to do some, if you have the manpower, and so determining what is right for your agency at the right time. I think is one of the large things, and I see her on today, so she can take credit for this question. But actually, one of our grantees had asked me at one point is, how do you determine what's the right technology or what's the right approach for any one department at a time? So, and obviously that is very department dependent on the challenges that you're facing, your community, your available resources. And maybe this is a bit of a tough question that there's no direct answer on, but Chief MacGillis, as a chief, how do you determine which avenues that you're going down, right, to address a particular issue? Are there certain factors that you keep in mind or certain items that you look at?
Sure, you're looking at your budget. What do you have now to spend, along with the other polls, scarce resources, funding going forward. You also have to look at the technology going forward, capacity of your department, crime trends. I'll use OD Map. It's a free resource. I didn't mention it in my initial presentation. It is a free application developed by Washington, Baltimore, HIDTA that can map overdose events both in your municipality, your county, your state, your region. It's scalable, it's free, but do we even need that? It might be good for Eric, but for Joseph, it may not be necessary if they don't have those type of overdose events. So we all love in law enforcement, we all love free is better. And even an agency my size, it's hard to get with 104 people in my department and some really smart people to take the time to earmark people to write for those grants. That's the other challenge. So we found value in partnering if there's a local university nearby, allowing them to do their research study in conjunction with our policing need. They get the data that they want for their article or their publication, but it also helps provide some academic involvement in what we're doing in policing, the data that we need to inform us on where we should spend those scarce funds. By the way, Chief Stanford, I'll be in your neck of the woods next week. I'll be in Alabama. So I'll look for you.
Yeah, absolutely. All right. Any other kind of questions folks are putting in the chat? Just want to make sure sometimes they go to folks. So Reginald, if you have any questions coming to you as the host, just let me know. Feel free to shout those out. I did receive one question in the chat from me related to partnerships. So I think a couple of you all alluded to them, right? Chief MacGillis, you alluded to kind of those public health partnerships. So I have a question here from a grantee. How are you establishing those relationships? So Chief MacGillis, I'll open that to you first, and then Chief Stanford and Deputy, I'll pivot to you all for those, for your responses, because Chief Stanford, you mentioned the private-public partnership for technology placements and cameras. And then Deputy Scott, I'll pivot to you after that. So Chief MacGillis, how are you making those partnerships, or how are you determining what partnerships to engage in?
I'm leveraging partnerships that I had from my previous agency, encouraging my staff to develop those relationships. I think we all agree relationships are the conduit of influence and making things happen. And if you don't know, don't be afraid to call and ask somebody for information, for some advice. I always joke around and say there's never an original idea in police work. Just ask around, put it on the soundboard, talk to your chiefs associations, your sheriff's associations, present the idea, and you'll find those options because other departments are dealing with the same thing.
Okay. Thanks, Chief. All right, Chief Stanford, on your side on the technology piece and the poll cameras, how did you all engage in those partnerships initially?
Well, I mean, it all goes back to Ashland being a very remote, small community and building relationships over a period of years. I mean, the two guys that I'm dealing with, I went to school with, played football with. I mean, we've been around each other a lot. And just showing the need and how it would build our relationships and strengthen those connections and give them some peace of mind when those things do go up, because they will recognize them as a public safety camera to help deal with some of the issues, some of the things that are going on. I mean, one of them is the school board. It's the school board of property. And they were all for putting up a camera because it helps to identify problems that may be coming in. It helps us to see when cars are coming into the back of the school, and it's all about strengthening those local partnerships, because at the end of the day, I mean, in a small community, we all have to work together.
Absolutely. Great, thank you. Deputy Scott, anything from your perspective to add to that question?
Yeah, I think that for us, for instance, we're actually dependent upon mutual aid in this area. I think most small agencies are. We're basically isolated in the mountains. There's no major thoroughfares that come through here. There's nothing that brings people here. We're just sort of in the island, so we're very dependent upon other agencies for mutual aid. And that helps us to maintain our relationships. The one thing I will say is that most agencies around you, in my experience, are very willing to assist you. We've utilized our agencies around us for training on a regular basis, donation of equipment. A lot of our larger metropolitan agencies are well equipped. They qualify for a lot more grant opportunities, and so instead of getting rid of their equipment on a site, they'll donate equipment to us. But that's all a part of just reaching out and establishing a relationship with them. And I think that's the big thing, is establish a relationship if you do not have one, and then going forward from there, just assist them, and I assure you that they'll assist you as well.
Perfect. Thank you, Deputy Scott. All right. Chief MacGillis, we've talked a little bit about this program and the wide range of efforts that grantees are doing as a part of the program. So are there any questions that you have for the grantees to pose to start thinking about these things that you'd like to hear from them on?
Well, I'm going to put something in the chat box. It's just a map of the different HIDTA counties in every state, PDF. If you want to start developing a relationship, again, you don't have to be a HIDTA county to reap the benefits of what HIDTA has to offer, because drugs are a problem that all of us are facing. if you do have capacity to have somebody even on a part-time basis to be involved in any of those types of task forces, you also can reap the benefits of asset forfeiture if your state allows for that. That can also help fund other equipment needs that you have, technology or computer systems, hardware, squad car components that you don't have a budget for in a smaller municipality. I found that to be incredibly beneficial. So one of the questions that rings through my mind, overdoses, we're all dealing with it. So how can you reap the benefits if you have an overdose spike in your region? Whether it's you, Eric, in a rural area surrounded by mountains, it hits everywhere. Well, you still have to investigate, your deputies still have to investigate, but then what? What am I going to do with the phones? I don't have a phone downloading system. But if you're close enough to a watch center, you can bring your devices with a phone call and permission. They will help do that download. Then what do you do with that data to apply it towards your investigative practices? They can show you how to apply those in the different spreadsheets and how they cross reference it with their incredibly large databases that they have of drug-involved phones in the distribution network. They can even help use software and technology to map out how drugs are being brought to your respective jurisdictions from the bigger mothership distribution cities. And ultimately, if you have an overdose you can solve today, it may get solved a year down the road because that information is in those data systems to help bring solvability to those overdose trends coming to your jurisdictions. So that's something that Sam and I talked about prior to this. If I'm in a department of 10 people, I don't have capacity. How do I handle an overdose spike? What services are out there that I can leverage?
Absolutely. For those of you who are on today, Chief MacGillis has listed a couple of resources available to you. Are there any of you who have accessed or used those resources that he's mentioned, whether it be ODMAP, whether it be these watch centers? Are there any folks on that who have done that outreach or engaged in those that would like to come off of mute and kind of share their experience or how they use those resources? And if folks are a little, shy to come off of mute, I do see a couple of very familiar names in the attendee list that I know are doing some work around this and maybe have some experience. So I may start calling on folks.
Samantha, I'll comment on it. Yeah. The East Alabama Metro Crime Center located in Oxford, Alabama is actually where we come up with some of our resources and ideas. And we use them as a local forensics group, but we go through them and then we actually have people assigned to go up and work cases with the what we call the EMAC. And they do all of our digital forensics for us and help us work cases from front to back and have, a large amount of resources for that process.
Great, thank you. Yes, and for those who may be not as familiar as well, Oxford, Alabama is also a BJA grantee recipient for the National Public Safety Partnership as well. So they are involved in grants too. And then I do see that we've had Sergeant Mike Burgess in the chat here note that he has used or accessed some of these resources. Sergeant, would you be willing to come off of mute and talk about some of those experiences?
Sure, why not? So we're the Oneida City Police. We're in upstate New York. We're about 25 minutes or so east of Syracuse, New York. We are the only city in Madison County, and we're kind of smack in between the Utica, Rome, and Syracuse area. So we get a lot of spillover from there. We are a small agency, smaller community. We're about 23 square miles, and we cover approximately 13,000 people. with a 28-man department when it's fully staffed. As part of this grant, we work pretty closely with the CNY Crime Analysis Center based out of Syracuse Police Department. And we have met with them. We gave them, I believe, 6 or 7 years worth of report data, and asked for their assistance in creating crime mapping for us. And we used the data that they came up with to identify specific hotspots in Oneida that we could concentrate our efforts. That was just one aspect of what we've done so far with this grant. Another aspect is we also work closely with our regional HIDTA. We do OD mapping for every overdose in the county, I believe does it, but our agency does it for every single overdose. And that is something that that HIDTA and the Crime Analysis Center has been fantastic with, as well as stamps on heroin and fentanyl packaging, things like that. They track all that stuff for us, which is fantastic. As far as partnerships, we do have some very strong partnerships within our community. However, our chief, Steve Lowell, who's on here today also, happened to have a connect, if you will, at Syracuse University. And they allowed us to come in and present what our project was when it came to this grant. And we basically asked for their help with trying to figure out what the community perceives the police as, what they perceive the crime problems to be like, things like that. And their class went off and running for a semester and put together, I believe they ended up breaking up into 4 or 5 different groups within their class, and they each did their own thing and presented it to us a couple of weeks ago, which really gave us some more insight on how we're going to tackle this. So, like I said, Chief Steve Lowell is on here if he wants to chime in at all on all of this. But yeah, we are definitely using all the resources that we can, both with the HIDTA, with the local, and with the Syracuse University. So those are all great resources, and I absolutely agree with the other speakers on those points. Chief?
One of the main things, yeah, that was good, Mike. Thanks for turning it over and throwing me out there. But OD map has been great. I just clicked on the PDF that was put in the chat, and surprisingly, Madison County is not a HIDTA county, but we are sandwiched in between Oneida County and Onondaga County. So we have 2 major cities in both of those counties. But again, we utilize OD map. The city of Oneida Police and the Madison County Sheriffs Madison County was right behind us with getting on board and putting in information into OD map through our Madison County 911 center. And so that's been great because we can literally track our overdoses. Everything, most of our stuff comes over from the Canadian border, which are all HIDTA counties. And you can, when we look at not only the county map of overdoses, we can see when we look at the state map, they literally come down from the Canadian border down Route 81 and Route 11, and that's the path of drugs. So using that evidence-based policing approach and looking at the journey of crime, in other words, so where's crime happening, and looking at the root causes. Well, why is it happening in these areas? And those evidence-based policing, less reactive, more proactive approach of identifying guardians or identifying opportunity. Why is crime occurring in certain areas is the approach that we're taking in our partnership with Syracuse University, and measuring what the public's perception is, and maybe just as a resource and saying, well, what are we seeing? Because our focus is in the law enforcement realm of things, but what is the public seeing that we're maybe just not through crime stats? We can look at crime data all day long, but we need to look at the victims of crime and people who don't report crimes, because they're probably seeing stuff that we're missing.
Great. Thank you both for coming off of mute and sharing those experiences. And it's also very positive. I've done some work. I'd share this with Chief MacGillis. I've done some work with the ODMAP team in the past, so I was aware of that resource. But I do think it's one that is maybe a lesser known resource. So it's great to hear that some folks are using it and having very positive experiences or getting value out of that. I do want to pick on one of our other individuals who have commented in the chat. So David of the Comanche, Texas Police Department, you mentioned that you all have been engaged with the HIDTA in your area as well. Can you speak to that a little bit? If you're able to come off of mute. Okay, no mic. All right. So it looks like they have used their HIDTA as well. Just give folks a little bit of background. They are using forensic extraction software, as well as they do have some mobile LPRs that they have deployed. They had also opted to do some fixed cameras as well, but unfortunately, due to the rurality of the area, services were not, they oftentimes went down, they weren't able to connect. So they are trying a different approach there in terms of removing those fixed cameras from their unit.
So, Samantha, I have a question about, is there going to be a discussion around this next round of funding?
We have some slides about funding. Yep, right after we close out this kind of discussion around narcotics trafficking. So we will talk about that a little bit.
John Conley told me to ask, so.
John's pinging people in the background. Good. So I get it. Yeah.
Thank you for that, Chief. Appreciate it.
He's fair is fair. I picked on him, so he was going to pick on you.
What John also said is that apparently Chief MacGillis promised him some brats and Miller Lite, I guess. I don't know. So I don't know what the connection is there around Milwaukee PD, but.
I can make that happen, Chief.
All right.
You bet.
Okay. Good deal. All right. Any other kind of questions or comments that folks wanted to share before we do talk about some of the upcoming funding opportunities as well as upcoming events that we have? All right, giving folks a couple of, all right. Chief MacGillis, any final closing comments from you as our guest speaker for today's event?
Just to wrap up, we all are facing the same issues. It's all about scale and frequency, but they're the same issues for the most part. And you have to decide what type of resources you're going to tap into based on the crime trends you're seeing in your area. And HIDTA is a great resource, and I will advocate for people to connect with them all day long because they are definitely a force multiplier at very minimal cost of time, personnel, and resources on your end. That's it. And I'm available for any questions after this presentation too. And Sam, if you're going to share my contact information, please do with the group.
Yeah, absolutely. Perfect. Thank you. So Chief is reading my mind a little bit. For those of you who have heard anything today that you're interested in learning more about or connecting with Chief MacGillis outside of this event, do reach out to us and we can make those connections happen for you. All right, so I do want to devote the last 10 minutes or so to some upcoming events as well as some funding. So for our open funding opportunity, I am going to turn it over to Juliana Palmer, who's a policy advisor at the Bureau of Justice Assistance, to talk about an open BJA grant. So Juliana.
Thanks, Sam, and thanks everyone for giving me a couple minutes of your time today. So as Sam mentioned, just wanted to take a couple of minutes of your time to share an open funding opportunity that we have available right now. I'm going to put the link in the chat just in case that you want to save it for later. But as it was mentioned by one of the presenters earlier, small and rural agencies often encounter difficulty identifying federal grant funding to address your unique challenges. So through this funding opportunity, BJA seeks to support small and rural agencies in efforts to combat various violent crime challenges. We're going to be providing funding to small and or rural agencies or prosecutors interested in implementing or improving the capacity around one or more critical elements in our Violent Crime Reduction Operations Guide or Prosecutor's Guide to Reducing Violence and Building Safer Communities. I'll drop those into the chat as well for you to reference. Essentially, through this solicitation, we're looking for applications to refer to the guide and identify a critical element, one or more of those elements, to really focus on in your crime fighting strategy. So those elements that the guide highlights includes community engagement, partnerships, technology, analytics and intelligence, training and tactics, resources and sustainability, as well as accountability. And a lot of this is through the work that you're already doing right now. So it's really just a matter of going back to that guide, honing in on one or more of those critical elements and building that program design around it. You can find all of those resources online as well as links into the solicitation. Next slide. As far as eligibility for this solicitation, we are opening it to small and rural agencies. So small agencies is defined through the solicitation as any agency with fewer than 250 or fewer sworn officers. And a rural agency is defined as an agency serving any area or community, no part of which is within an area designated as a standard metropolitan statistical area, or any agency serving one or more rural census tracts. Tribal agencies are also eligible for this funding. Funding available through the solicitation, $300,000 is the maximum award amount per application. We do anticipate making 36 awards through this solicitation with funding to begin October 1st, 2023 for 36 months. One of the questions that we've received from existing RVCRI sites is, well, are we eligible for this funding? Absolutely. So if you have a current topic that you're focusing on, what we would want to ensure is that you're explaining through your application how you're going to enhance it through this additional funding. But there's certainly other crime challenges that you might seek to identify and problem solve through this funding. So for some important dates, we posted this solicitation April 17th. We do have a couple of deadlines. Grants.gov deadline will be June 13th, 2023 at 8:59 p.m. Eastern. And the Just Grants deadline is June 20th, 2023 at 8:59 p.m. Eastern. So for those sites who apply directly through NPI or LISC for the microgrant funding, this is a different application process. We do have various resources that are available to assist. If you have challenges, I'll put some of them into the chat as well. As you're working through your application, we want to make sure that the websites and those processes are not barriers to you applying for this funding, as we know that sometimes it can be kind of overwhelming to get on there and apply, you know, do something on grants.gov and then apply, do an entire package on Just Grants. So we have resource centers for that. Again, I'm putting them in the chat. I know it's a lot of information, but there's an email and number for grants.gov if you have any questions, as well as Just Grants. And then with the programmatic requirements, there's an email. It's grants@ncjrs.gov. And what that email will do is provide you with an opportunity to say, hey, I have a question around this design. This solicitation says I have to do this as a deliverable. Can you explain that to me better so I can make sure I address it in my proposal? They will route that to the appropriate person, which would be me, and then I'll respond. So if you have any questions with that program design, feel free to reach out to that email address, and we'll answer your questions as soon as we receive them. But we're excited to provide additional funding for this content area and to provide opportunities for small and rural agencies to address their violent crime problems. So we hope that you apply, and if you have any questions, feel free to let us know.
Thanks, Juliana. We do have a couple of minutes, but we have one, additional slide to walk through, which is upcoming events. But does anyone have any questions for Juliana about the grant or the process? Juliana, I will say I've gotten one question to my chat. They saw, right, that there was the solicitation webinar on May 16th. Will that recording be available for folks?
It will be available. Yes. So the first link that I placed into the chat is the link for the actual solicitation. they are finalizing the webinar. I'll follow that up today to make sure, see where that is at. But there will be a recording and a transcript available.
Then it looks like we have one additional question here as well. Would that grant be eligible to pay for annual costs such as flock subscriptions, things of that nature?
So you can pay for annual subscriptions with the funding. However, you will want to think through what sustainability will look like beyond the grant period. But so long as you're connecting that back to your violent crime strategy, you would be able to use funding for that purpose.
All right.
I have a question, Juliana. Sorry.
Yeah, go on, Chief.
Is there any preference? I know obviously we'll have to submit a solid proposal, but is there any, it's not specifically addressed in the award, but for current grantees, addressing the sustainability of our current projects and how we're utilizing funds, is there any preference? Number one, I guess, is the main question.
Any preference around?
Current grantees reapplying for this next round of funding.
So there is not preference. There's no consideration around that. Our peer review process is actually external. Now, what you could do in your proposal is write about your existing efforts and your commitment to those problem solving and crime violence reduction challenges. That would be, a consideration for you putting your application together. But there's no preference or consideration around that. It's a kind of external peer review process that's outside of the existing funding stream. Does that help?
Only if I get funded.
Yeah, I think it's always good to, and I've been, just for context, I've been on the grant writing end. I started my career at a local circuit court writing grants, and I had no idea what I was doing, but it's always really helpful to write about your existing efforts, what you have ongoing, to demonstrate, hey, we've been tracking this. We know this is an issue. This is why we need the funding to demonstrate what we can do to prevent this violence in our jurisdiction. So if you're a current grantee, I would definitely talk about your ongoing crime reduction efforts and successes that you've had so far, and again, how you would utilize this funding to build on and enhance any efforts that you have going right now.
And then
you said I one or more of those areas in the operations guide.
Yes.
But
yes, and we're looking for applicants to reference that throughout their application. So again, a lot of it's really fundamentals, and what you're doing right now with a lot of your programs and your designs, partnerships, for example, technology, all of those. When Sam and John and I connect to chat about the different progress of sites, you're not usually doing just one of those areas. A lot of designs cut across the entire guide. So the more you can bolster your application with saying, yeah, we want to do partnerships. Yes, we want to do community engagement. Yes, we want to do technology, because all of that goes into reducing violent crime. I think that would make for a stronger application.
And what's the likelihood of any micro grants or sub grants that might be coming?
So I don't have the answer to that yet. I think it really depends on how this cohort that we're looking to fund through FY23 goes.
I guess my concern is we're an agency of 28. Deputy Scott is, I think he said, an agency of 8, and the other chief that spoke was also a very small police agency. With the expansion of allowing or considering a small police agency of 25 sworn members or less, it's just concern of being beat out by the larger agencies that have dedicated personnel for this, that are not already stretched thin. So I want to make sure I put it together good proposals where I'm coming.
Yeah. Absolutely. No, that's always good, valuable insight to receive. And again, as you're working on that program design, feel free to contact that grants at ncjrs.gov if you have specific questions about putting together that proposal, or if you have any challenges navigating that federal grant. I mean, it's a beast. I know that it is. So, you know, certainly something that we talk a lot about, Stan, John, and I, the RVCRI team. So, you know, keep sharing that feedback, and, you know, we'll definitely work to take that into consideration. I did want to get to Sergeant Burge's question. Yes, you could help pay for overtime costs. Again, so long as it's connected back to your violent crime reduction strategy. So if they're collaborating with you on CEPTED, absolutely.
All right, thank you for those wonderful questions. If you have any additional questions, feel free to send them in to either myself or John at LISC, right? We will help get those questions as well if we have any additional ones answered. We are right at time, just a little over. I want to be respectful of everyone's time. We do appreciate you all coming and joining us today and speaking. Couple of quick reminders as we close out. One, I mentioned that evaluation survey. I know surveys sometimes can be a bit burdensome to fill out, but if you do have time and you're able to complete it, we do appreciate that. Those surveys help us improve for our future events. I'm going to put the link for the survey in our chat here. You can scan the QR code as well if you'd like. It will come in our follow-up email. So this is a little bit different of an approach, right, to an online event, more open discussion than presentation. So if you have any feedback on that you'd like to share, or future topics that you want to hear about, that survey is a great place to share that information. And then we do have a couple of upcoming events, one being a Place in Crime and CEPTED webinar scheduled for June the 8th. John Connolly, would you like to say anything additional about that upcoming event that you all are hosting?
Just very quickly, a number of sites have expressed interest in learning more about the known relationship between place and crime and CEPTED crime prevention through environmental design, which a set of tools that departments and partners can utilize to address and impact the built environment to reduce opportunities for crime to occur or reoccur. So looking forward to that event Thursday, June 8th at 2 p.m. Details have been previously provided, but we'll be providing registration link reminders shortly after the holiday. Thanks, Sam.
Thanks, John. All right. And then other upcoming events in July, we are looking to host a webinar on victim services in rural communities. That will be scheduled for July 6th. And then our next roundtable, so just like this one, different topical focus, is scheduled for July 20th. Additional details to follow on that. The last reminders that I will leave you all with is if you would like us to connect you with anyone that you heard speak today, or you have additional questions on any of the resources or topics that we've discussed, please reach out. We can get those connections for you. And the other thing that I will add in is we do typically, after these events, share an updated contact list of folks that are in the program, so that you all can have those direct connections with each other as well as peer agencies. So if you would like to be added to that contact list that we will share, feel free to email either John or myself, and we will get you added so that it goes out with the next round. That contact list is only shared with other grantees. So it would stay within our cohort here of RVCRI grantees. With that, thank you all for joining us today and for staying a few minutes over. We appreciate that, and I hope you have a great rest of your afternoon.